Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on developing research reflexivity. Today, we're going to talk about methodological reflexivity as part of the learning journey. There you go. We have the aim of the session. And the session is divided into three stages. So we do talk about what methodological reflexivity is, then how this is reflected or expressed in your research journey. And then we move on to our group reflective practice. This is, again, the figure that we have seen now for a few sessions that gives us a reminder of that research proposal that we submit or that you are developing or that it's already done for you. Just to keep in mind that in every stage of the research proposal, as you plan and conduct research, you are encouraged to engage with your personal and functional reflexivity. Now, last week, we did talk about personal reflexivity, and we mentioned that this is a reflexivity that runs across all of the stages of the research journey, including the planning, conducting research, writing the research report, and also dissemination, which they don't appear here, but you get a sense of, it is embedded, it should be embedded across the research journey. So as part of the functional reflexivity, we were saying last class that is divided into the methodological, interpersonal, and contextual. Now, that doesn't mean that these two types of reflexivity are completely disconnected. They are informing each other, but it's just a way in which academics have found a way of explaining the differences between these aspects of reflexivity. Rosalind is one of the people that are talking about distinguishing types of reflexivity as we engage in the different stages of the research journey. Then we have Olmos Vega, for instance, who talks about methodological reflexivity as that one that is focused on bringing back together your paradigmatic orientation. So what is your research paradigm and how is this then expressed in the methodology that you used? In our week 6, we did talk a lot about research paradigms. And this is something you also explore in different units and how it is important that the methodology and your paradigms, research paradigms align. So you're not saying something like, well, I'm a very person that, I believe in numbers, I trust numbers, and then suddenly you develop a completely qualitative research project. And finding that alignment is important, because it is what will inform your project, basically. We know then that a paradigm is a world view that informs every effort, every step of your decision-making process. A paradigm entails opening and foreclosing particular possibilities. What does that mean? So basically, it's opening, that window, that door to various ways of possibilities. So if you are focusing on a qualitative research and you do decide to carry on interviews as opposed to observations, then the interviews give you various types of affordances, possibilities that you will be collecting as part of your data. And that is some completely different from if you adopt a teaching, for instance, a teaching observation, or observations in a particular place, a particular context, that will also give you completely different data. And if you decide to utilize both in a way of triangulating this information, that is also giving you more and different data. So it is also about understanding the boundaries. I said entails, but it's entails. Sorry, my second language does betray me. My first language betrays me. Anyway, understanding those boundaries, then, that every time you choose a paradigm, a methodology, the possibilities, the different kind of data you're collecting, are there. It's just about making sure that every step of the process is explicitly rationalized, and that you show awareness of how your data might be different from anyone else doing a similar study, collecting data in a different way. And in the same way as in which your paradigm needs to align with your methodology, the theoretical or conceptual framework needs to be aligned as well. In class, I gave an example of my own research project. So my research project was all about exploring the narratives of Mexican teachers who were working in the UK as foreign language assistants. Now, these Mexican teachers were English teachers back in Mexico at different levels. And they had 1 year of their experience living and working abroad. And I got them to talk to me about their stories. Now, if I tell you a little bit about my own paradigm, my understanding of the world, again, a research paradigm is an understanding of the world, is that people make sense of their experiences and they develop knowledge, let's call it practical knowledge, from the experiences that they live. That is my position in terms of how I understand knowledge as being developed. Obviously, this also comprises, as people learn from experience, we document experience, we talk about experience, and we teach each other about, what we learn, all those lessons that we learn. Then my methodology was a completely focused, it was actually focused on narrative inquiry, which again aligns to my understanding of the world. So narratives as a way of understanding experience and exploring experience, that we have then the research aspect of narratives. And then my data gathering tools were narrative interviews. So in a way, this is aligned with my research paradigm. It is logical with my research method and my data gathering tools. Now, if I tell you a bit about my theoretical and conceptual frameworks, then I started developing a theoretical framework talking about reflection. And we've seen this because actually part of my study and the outcomes of my study enabled me to develop this unit. So we have this knowledge put into practice, philosophies put into practice, research into practice, but we can talk about that later. So I started from the idea, the notion of reflection as a meaning-making process, as connected to narratives and narrations. So how people make sense of experience through the stories they tell has a link to reflection. And for that, I did talk about models of reflection, how a specific model fits in with, the theory out there about narratives. So that was my conceptual framework, which again is really not different from my methodological approach or my understandings as my research paradigm. So if I ask you, how about you, your current ideas for your research project? What is your research paradigm? How does that link back to your research methodology, your methodological choices, and your theories? That's a question to answer. But again, for that, we will have a discussion later on your pre-task. And you can start from there. I mean, remember that the pre-task is just reflective notes that can help you to then to get you started thinking about your reflexivity, operationalizing your reflexivity. But you are encouraged to carry on those deep reflections that sometimes you start in the class, outside the classroom as well. We also have more people talking about the task, the task of the methodologically reflexive researcher is to discern the boundaries or limits. We go back to that idea of what are the limits. So if you're doing a type of, if you're adopting a type of methodology, then make sure that you are taking the appropriate approaches and that you're not suddenly moving into or adding other things that might not be coherent. So the idea of fitting, examining that everything you do is fitting with your research paradigm. And I think I will show you later on a diagram with these ideas. It's just that captures, that diagram or figure captures what I'm saying. So how does then methodologically reflexivity is expressed in the research journey? If we focus then on that idea of the research paradigm, your belief system, which again, it could change over time and depending on your research purposes, you might adjust your worldview in order to then find out what you want to explore. At the end of the day, we also recognize that different research projects have different angles, and different research questions can be answered differently. But generally, and I would say most often, people who are quantitative are always quantitative. So you have those experts, academic experts, that are just like, this is a quantitative researcher, this is a qualitative researcher, which is completely fine. People will carry on with that belief system over time, and that's also okay. We've seen this figure before last week about, where your paradigm, or where you might be situated in the research paradigm discussions and dimensions. It's very important then to have an understanding of what's your stance, what makes your research, for instance, transformative in comparison with a constructivist research. And understanding that is important, because then when you get to your viva questions, you will be able to articulate your positionality. A figure that responds to the question, how do you decide on a paradigm? So we've then always, and going back to even our first session on the magical day, what your values are, what's more important to you, what you value in your life, in your work, in your studies, that is informing your paradigm choice and your research questions. And it's a cycle. So again, that idea of fitting together, aligning is important. And also work when collaborating with other people, if you're working with a quantitative person and you're doing the qualitative angle of things, then it is important that you do have conversations about how does these ideas fit together, and that you have an understanding of each other's work. That just helps the collaboration. And again, another illustration that captures the ideas that we discussed earlier is this one, where we talk about the research methods need to be coherent with your philosophical worldviews and your methodology, but also, and that's very interesting, that academics do talk about the idea of then the conceptual framework is part of the equation, is part of that triangulation, and that's what examiners look at when they are in a viva moment, or when they read a dissertation, a thesis, that coherence between these elements. Now I'll give you a couple of seconds to pause the video and to look at this example. I want you to tell me what this example is missing. From your responses and going back to our previous sessions, I think you're right. That example is missing a rationale for the decisions that have been articulated as this is what we did. Well, remember that methodological reflexivity is not just saying about what you did or how, it is saying and responding to the question why you did what you did. So if you find yourself just describing what you did and how you did things, but not saying why, it is important that you go back and redraft that piece that you're writing, because justifying your choices is what makes your methodological chapter more reflexive. And as examiners, we want to see this why, because we're always trying to find the connections. This why will help me then to go back to your what you said in chapter 1 about your research paradigm, and so on and so forth. What you will say then afterwards, or what you said even before, after your research paradigm, which is what you said about the topic in your theoretical or conceptual framework, and anything else that goes before that methodological chapter. And if you want to then make that methodology more reflexive as you justify your choices, please use methodological references. And those references as well, people that you read need to also be people that are in line with your ideas, or you're obviously choosing references that you read because they are in line with your thinking. So do include methodological references or sources as you justify your decisions. So that's it. We're going to move on to our reflective practice. And this is where we discuss the pre-task. And if I open the pre-task just for you to have an idea of what you're discussing today. So we're in week 7. We go into the aims and pre-session materials, and that's the pre-task there. And as I said before, this is just to get you started thinking about your methodological reflexivity. There are more questions that you could think about a bit more, or come up with other questions. And more importantly, I would say, because in our assignment, you are encouraged in the first part of your assignment to think about a model of reflection that will get you there to respond to different questions. I would say do this exercise every time you see a pre-task. Think about what model of reflection is going to be able to help me to link all these questions at the different stages of reflection, and what other questions can I add to my model. Because that's what we're going to be doing here. As you're justifying why you're choosing specific models of reflection, you're also then responding to different questions about your methodological reflexivity. And it's interesting to see how, where you would position specific questions at different stages of the reflective spiral. But yeah, let's go to our group reflective practice, and we'll see you next week.